last couple of weeks, had a series on worship. And I'm really excited to be speaking on worship because you might be able to tell I love worship. I also may have oversang a little bit this morning, so if my voice also croaks out halfway through, it's Jesus' fault because I was worshipping him. What we've had a look at is, Luke had a look on the first week about what we do in worship. He talked about raising hands, singing, shouts of praise to God. Second week, Andy had a look at how we worship, a lifestyle of worship being a living sacrifice. And this week, we're looking at why we worship God. For me, there's two questions in there, so we're going to look at both of them. Why do we worship? Anyway, why do we worship anything? And why do we worship God? So, to start off with, why do we worship? The Oxford English Dictionary, which is always a wonderful place to start when you're preaching, defines worship like this. Worship is religious rites or ceremonies constituting a formal expression of reverence for a deity. I'm not reading that again because it's got a lot of words in it. The second one is it is a great admiration or devotion shown towards a person or a principle. And it is honor given to someone in recognition of their merit. Now, when I looked that up in the dictionary, I thought, coincidence? Those three definitions match exactly with the 3 weeks that we've been looking at. Number one, the religious rites or ceremonies, basically what we do, the actions that we do to make up our formal expression to God. That's what Luke looked at in the first week. Second week, a great admiration and devotion. Andy looked at lifestyle of worship, offering yourself as a living sacrifice to God, which is the ultimate act of devotion. And then this week, giving honor to someone in recognition of their merit. We're looking at why we worship God, why he's worthy of our worship. So it's almost like it was meant to be. So the first part of the question, why do we worship? Spoiler alert, dead easy answer, because we were made to. When I thought about this question, a song lyric popped into my head. If you've been in church at all, you may know the song that I'm talking about. And Luke mentioned a few weeks ago that worship songs do often remind us about what we believe. And so the verse of the song is this. It's in God of Ages, and it's made to worship. If we don't sing, the rocks will soon cry out. By your spirit, we were set apart. Now, a really important thing that Luke also said is that we don't take our theology, which is what we believe about God, we don't take our theology from songs. We take our theology from the Bible. So I'm just going to point out to you where these words are in the Bible so that you can know it's not just some nice made-up poetry. All right? First of all, made to worship. Isaiah chapter 43, verse 7 says this. These are my people. I created each of them to bring honor to me. We've just defined worship as bringing honor to someone. Basically, I created each of them to worship me. Second bit, if we don't sing, the rocks will soon cry out. That's in Luke 19, verse 40. And it's where Jesus was entering Jerusalem and all the people were singing and praising. And the disciples are like, oh, Lord, will you tell him to shut up? And they said, I tell you, if these people keep silent, the stones will cry out in praise. There you go. It's quite straightforward. And then by your spirit, we were set apart. That's in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness and into his wonderful light. You are set apart for Jesus to praise him. So if you've ever wondered, actually, hang on, why do we do this worship that we do in church? Well, the Bible tells us that you were made to do it, so you can't get out of it. Sorry about that. Now, there might actually be some of you that don't believe what the Bible says. That's fine, you're not there yet. But even if you don't believe the words of the Bible, you can actually see this principle reflected in human behavior. You may or may not have noticed it before. People who give recognition, show admiration, are devoted to something that's greater than themselves. Usually we call them fans. Think about it. You've got a football team. People spend hundreds and thousands of pounds on tickets, merchandise, scarves, posters, cards, all sorts of things. For them, that is them being part of something bigger than themselves. They are a fan. They're a part of a club. They are showing devotion and commitment to something. They worship them, basically. Celebrities. Now, they're a bit of an anomaly, really, aren't they, celebrities? Because they're just human beings. But they are celebrities because people show admiration to them. They recognize them for something. They're devoted to them. They raise them up in their minds to this like higher place. That's the only reason they're celebrities. They might have acted in one good film, or more likely nowadays taking their shirt off in a film, and then people are sort of all over them thinking, oh, they're amazing. Funnily enough, people's career, their money, their standing in life, that might be what they worship. That might be their end goal, the thing that they are devoted to above all else. So you actually think about a couple of people that you know that aren't in church and that don't know Jesus. You might actually be able to see these traits of worship in their lives. So you can't deny the fact, actually, all human beings, regardless of whether they acknowledge God or not, were made to worship something. My friend at work, he's one of our teachers, and one day in the holidays, we were meant to be popping over to his house so that Ben could measure up for some work in his garden, as he does. So I texted him, I said, all right, what time should we come over? And he went, well, I'll probably be finished at church about 11, so any time after that. And I kind of went, church, it's Friday morning in half term. You are definitely not a Christian. You've told me this before. You don't go to church. What are you talking about? And so I just texted him. I was like, church? ? And he was like, yeah, my place of worship, with a little winky face. I'm going, oh, he meant the gym. Literally. He goes to the gym 6 days out of 7. He never misses. If he doesn't go, he hates that the day is ruined, he's off his track, everything like that. He will openly admit that for him, he actually calls it, the gym, my place of worship. Because for him, his fitness goals, his lifestyle, that is his thing on a pedestal. That is the thing that he works towards, he's devoted to. Something bigger than just himself. So why do we worship? We were made to. It's an innate desire within you. We have to worship. So second then, covered that bit. Why do we worship God? Now there's about 1,001 verses that I could have pulled from the Bible that I love, that could have expressed to you some of the amazing things about God. You know, about faithfulness, how loving he is, his righteousness, worthy, being steadfast, victorious, all the things that actually we sing about quite a lot. Like you said, they remind us of the amazing attributes of God. But to be honest, I think you probably all know quite a lot of those already, especially considering this morning, loads of you shouted them out. It was amazing. I cried. Sorry. It was brilliant to hear you actually saying what it is about God that you find incredible. You've all read them before. You can go away and read them in your Bible. So we're not going to have a look at that. We're going to flip it. And we're going to have a look at some examples from the Bible of what happened when people didn't worship God or worshipped something other than God. Is that all right? I'm glad you agree because I'm doing it anyway. Right. So first of all, 1 Kings chapter 18. And we're looking at verses 22 to 38. I have 2 Bibles, so I've got to remember to pick up the right Bible here. If you have a Bible, you might want to turn to it. I'm not going to read it verse for verse. I'm going to give you a summary of this story. So if you would like to have your Bible open, you can check I'm not making it up. It's completely fine with me. 1 Kings chapter 18, starting at verse 22. Now what's happening here, it's a story that you may know if you've been in church for a while. It's Elijah and the prophets of Baal. It's a very wonderful Sunday school story because everybody dies in the end, and kids love that stuff, don't they? So what's happened is Elijah goes to the king, who has basically led the nation completely off track. They are worshipping idols and Baal and all sorts of false gods that don't exist. And Elijah basically goes to him and said, right, enough of this is ridiculous. I'm going to prove to you once and for all that your gods are fake and that the Lord is the one true God. So what he does is he says to him, right, you bring your 450 prophets of Baal, and I'll turn up. 450. We'll all meet on the top of the mountain, and I'm going to prove to you that my God is real. So it's hard to imagine 450 people, especially when you're in a room of probably about, 70 to 80 of us, maybe? I don't know. If I was to come and stand in the middle of a group of about 80 people, you guys, there's quite a lot of you here. There's one of me. Now, it's really nice. I don't mind standing here because I know that you all love me. You're all really nice and kind. But imagine if every single one of you hated my guts and wanted to kill me. Literally, for years, you had been wanting to kill me. Everybody give me a look on your face that makes it look like you want to kill me. Go on. Do a bit. That's a good one, Ed. Thanks. That's a bit too real, actually. I'm not sure about it. Make it look like you hate me. Nice. So it's actually quite intimidating being surrounded by people that don't like you. And there's only 80 of you. Imagine being surrounded by 450 people that literally want to kill you. Putting your neck on the line a little bit there, literally. And that's what Elijah was doing. He basically said, right, this is it. I'm going to prove to you that God is real. So he says to them, you set up an altar, cut up a dead animal, put it on your altar, and you pray to Baal, you pray to your God to send fire and burn up that offering. And then we'll know that he's real. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to set up my altar over here, cut up a dead animal, pop it on there, and then I'm going to pray to the Lord, and he sends fire. We'll know that he's the true God. Now, there's nothing subtle about that, is there? It's not like, oh, well, if a little bit of rain falls, then my God wins. It's actually, yeah, come on, straight down, fire from heaven, top of a mountain. There's no denying that that is supernatural. And what happens, as you can probably guess, is that the prophets of Baal set up their altar. They're all bowing down to it. They're worshipping it. They're praying. They're on their knees. They're doing all the different things, dancing around it that they would have been doing. And they're at it for a bit longer. Get to lunchtime. Been at it 3 hours and nothing's happening. Now, this is not Elijah's greatest moment, to be fair. I wouldn't suggest anybody do this. But he stands there and goes, oh, is your God asleep? Oh, he's not listening to you. Maybe he's on the toilet. He actually says that. Have you ever read that in the Bible? It literally says, maybe he's relieving himself. That's literally what he's saying to them. Have a look. Trust me. Go home and have a look. Maybe he's having a wee. So they just get really, really into it. They start cutting themselves and things that they would do as acts of worship that they believed would somehow show extra devotion to their God. Carry on dancing around. Nothing's happening. So I can imagine Elijah stood there on this side going, that's enough. Right, that's it. I'm done now. My turn. And so he basically just kneels down on the ground and just says, God, prove that you're real so that the nation believes. And instantly, fire collapses. Now, what he actually did was just to make sure that these people were 100% convinced that it didn't just spontaneously combust on its own because it was a really hot day. He'd asked servants to bring jars of water. We're not talking about little jars of water that we have at the back. It would have been jars of water the size of a person, big stone jars, right? And he asked them to tip it all over the altar, over the meat, over the wood, the stones on the ground. He actually dug a trench around the bottom of the altar and kept pouring water onto it until it was completely filled. So there was a trench of water that was full. The whole thing is completely sodden. And then God sends fire and burns up everything. Not one drop of water is left. Talk about that as evidence of God. It's amazing. So what happened to the prophets of Baal? Well, obviously the end of the story is he kills them all because they're all false and leading the people down a false path. But for them, can you imagine what it would be like to stood there and just see his altar instantly burn? You'd just be like, so disappointed, so let down. Their God was completely useless. He couldn't do for them what they asked of him. He didn't show up. There was absolutely no evidence of his existence at all, and he completely let them down. And in contrast to that, for Elijah, the one true God showed up in undeniable power, left nothing to chance, couldn't even question that it had happened. Everybody saw it, everybody knew. It's like that for us. If you put your trust in Jesus, and when you step out in faith for God, he will always come through for you. He will never leave you standing there looking stupid. That's what that story of Elijah teaches us. He'll never let you down. So we're going to flip now to Exodus chapter 32. Exodus chapter 32. The story here, I'm going to read these verses to you, and they're actually going to be on the screen behind me because we're going to have a look at some of the specific words in just a minute. What's happened is Moses has gone up the mountain, basically to get the 10 Commandments from God. You may be slightly familiar with that story, but he went up to meet with God, and God gave him a list of laws that were to govern the people that they were to live by. When the people saw that Moses was delayed coming down the mountain, the people gathered themselves together to Aaron and said to him, "Up, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him." I mean, really, they were going, he could have fallen off a ledge and been never coming back. We don't know. We're not waiting around. So Aaron said to them, okay, take off the rings of gold that are in the ears of your wives, your sons and your daughters, and bring them to me. So all the people took off rings of gold that were in their ears, and they brought them to Aaron. He received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. They said, these are your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, which is basically how they would worship something. And Aaron made a proclamation and said, tomorrow shall be a feast to the Lord. They rose early the next day, offering burnt offerings, peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat, drink, and basically be merry. Now, I want to look at a word in this verse for you, just to illustrate where the Israelites were at. Verse 1 says this. See if you can pick this one out. They said to Aaron, up, make us gods that will go before us. As for Moses, the man who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we don't know what's become of him. As for Moses, the man who brought us out of Egypt. Now, technically, Moses led them out of Egypt. But was it Moses that actually brought them out of Egypt? Was it Moses who showed his power by sending 10 plagues on Egypt? Was it Moses that split the sea? Was it Moses that completely defeated Pharaoh's army? No. But in terms of the minds of the Israelites at that time, Moses was the man who brought us up out of Egypt. I'm going to prove it to you, just in case you don't believe one verse. Exodus chapter 15, verse 24. I haven't got enough stringy bits in my Bible, so I'll have to turn, sorry. Exodus 15, verse 24. The people grumbled against Moses, saying, what are we going to drink? They were basically in the desert, had no food, had no water, and it was all Moses' fault. They grumbled at Moses. What are we going to drink? What are you going to do about this? Same again in chapter 16, verses 2 to 3. The whole congregation of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. We that would have died by the hand of the Lord in Egypt. Would that we have died. Basically, we would rather have died in the land of Egypt when we sat by meat pots and ate bread. You have brought us out into the wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. This is them talking to Moses. You brought us out here. It's your fault we're dying. What have you done? Again, chapter 17, verses 2 to 3. Exactly the same thing. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water. And at this point, bless him, Moses is going, why are you quarreling with me? Why are you coming to me with this problem? It's the Lord. Why are you testing the Lord? Do you not yet believe that he's the one that's going to provide for you? So even he recognized that the people were looking to him instead of God. They blamed Moses. So it kind of makes sense that by the time we get to chapter 32 and Moses has disappeared up the mountain, well, yeah, they're looking to Moses because they'd always looked to Moses. They'd never had their eyes on Jesus. They'd never fully accepted that God had brought them out of Egypt. They'd looked to Moses. So it kind of makes a bit of more sense, actually. They're not quite as horrible as you might think they are. They were just confused. They were looking at things, physical things, a person. They wanted something that they could touch. They talked about all the things that they had, their possessions, the things that they owned when they were back in Egypt. They're always harking back to that, going, oh, the good old days when we were there. Well, if it wasn't for you, we'd still have that and we wouldn't be dying. They wanted something to touch. That's why they actually physically made a statue. They got all their gold, they put it together, they made an idol that they could see and touch. That's what they needed. Well, that's what they thought they needed. And if you see in Exodus 32, again, verses 3 to 4, Aaron is trying to keep him on track. I mean, he's not trying very well. He's the one that physically made the idol. He didn't do a great job of it. But he said, now we'll put things on the altar and worship the Lord in front of the idol. So he's definitely off track here, but he's trying to kind of, keep God in the picture. But it's the people that said, it's not Aaron that says, where is it here? Verses 3 to 4. They said, the Israelites said, these are your gods, O Israel, the gods who brought you up out of Egypt. What's that about? suddenly just been created in the desert, and yet that was the one that brought you out of Egypt, obviously, because, he wasn't created then, but that makes sense. They just wanted something to be able to cling to and something to touch. It was like they were looking for anything other than God that they could worship. First Moses, and a big gold cow. And you may know some people in your life who don't have a big gold cow in their back garden or anything like that. But how often do you know of people who absolutely adore, are completely devoted to their bank balance, or the pieces of jewelry that they're saving up for, or the new car that they're looking for, or, the place that they're going on holiday? Their life goals, their ambitions, everything that they are striving for is tied up in physical wealth, the things of the world. We know, actually, the Bible tells us that things of the earth fade away. Moths and rust destroy them. So you can pretty much see that what happens when you put your trust in the things of earth is that they let you down. The Israelites couldn't trust God because they were too busy looking at other things, too busy with their hands in their pockets, feeling how much gold they'd got, looking for natural solutions and trying to depend on themselves. And ultimately, it left them wandering in the desert for 40 years. Because when they did actually get to their promised land, what God wanted them to have, they weren't in a habit of looking to God and trusting God. They were looking at themselves. So again, it just came out naturally for them. We can't take that land. Oh, there's far too many people in that land for us. We're not big enough. We're not strong enough. They're giants. We can't do that. Because they were looking at themselves. They'd never actually fixed their eyes on God and said, he is the one who has provided for us. He's the one that took us out of Egypt. It always confused me. I was like, well, how can they not get this? But they'd just focus in on completely the wrong thing. They never actually reached their destiny because they didn't recognize the greatness and the power of God who would save them. How sad is that? When you acknowledge God, and when you put God in his rightful place in your life, which is above all else, your life has meaning, purpose, and direction. God had somewhere for the Israelites to go. He had this amazing destiny and land for them. But because they weren't looking to him, committed and devoted to him, they never got there. Proverbs 3, verse 5 to 6, Sunday school verse again, I'm sure most of you can quote it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't depend on yourself, what you can do or what you understand. Acknowledge God in everything, and he will direct your paths. That's what we want for our lives. That's why we worship him. So, last chapter, Daniel, chapter 3. Oops. Daniel chapter 3. I'm going to read the whole chapter for you because it's the Bible and it's great and it tells a fantastic story. But I'm not going to read it word for word. It's a bit of a Ruth Ogglesby paraphrase version, so bear with me on this one. Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar basically is the guy who has taken the entire Israelite nation into exile. What exile means is he went to Israel, stole them all, and took them back to his country. He defeated them, and they were basically slaves. So he's in charge. They're not where they should be in life, and they're being ruled over by King Nebuchadnezzar. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up basically on a big hill so everyone could see it. He then summoned a lot of different people who are very important, including satraps, which I have no idea what they are, but lots of important people had come to a dedication service that he was having of this image of gold. So they all said to him, "This is what you are commanded to do." His advisors had said, "People, nations, and men of the land, as soon as you hear the sound of horns, flutes, and many other instruments, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Now, a few people that study the Bible, all these academic scholars other than me, quite a few of them think that the statue that Nebuchadnezzar built, had made out of gold, wasn't actually a statue of a god. It was a statue to represent his power, his wealth, and his status. So actually what Nebuchadnezzar was asking them to do was to worship him. They were saying to them, actually, this statue symbolizes everything that's wonderful about me as a king. So when the music plays, you're all going to bow down and worship it. Basically, you're all going to bow down and worship me. So therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, the flute, and all the other bits and pieces, all the peoples, nations of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now at this time, there were some people who didn't like the Jews. And they basically said, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, there are some Jews that are not bowing down to this idol when you play the music. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image. Well, that's how you know it's not an image of his God, because it says right there, they neither serve you or worship, they neither serve your gods or worship the image that you'd set up. So they don't worship your gods and they don't worship you. Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned these three men that they'd named, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Well, they were their names that they'd been given anyway. They were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true that you don't serve my gods? Is it true that you don't worship this golden statue that I've set up? Now, I'm going to give you one last chance. When you hear the music play, bow down and worship. And that will be fine. It's all very good. But if you don't, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace, and no God will be able to rescue you from my hand. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, then the God we serve is able to save us, and he will rescue us even from your hand, O great king. I can hear a bit of sarcasm there, can't you? But, you know what? Even if he doesn't, still not bowing down and worshipping you. Nebuchadnezzar was absolutely furious. You can see why. To him, the entire nation was bowing down and worshipping him, and three guys weren't doing it. Well, imagine how proud he must have been to build a statue that big in the first place. His pride could not handle that. So he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual. Now, I'm not a scientist. I don't know how you get fire 7 times hotter than fire, but apparently you can. Or maybe it's just the Bible using the number 7 to say it was the ultimate heat, the absolute, complete perfection of heat. You can't get any hotter than heat. He commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Not taking any chances here, not just getting the little guy from the TA who's on a weekend jaunt, you know. He's there going, the strongest soldiers are going to tie him up. And he threw these men, wearing robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and he was so desperate for it to be done right there, right then, that the fire was so hot, the flames killed the soldiers who threw them in there. So he lost a bunch of his best men. Whoops. King Nebuchadnezzar instantly leapt to his feet in amazement. Because he went, hang on a minute. Weren't there 3 men that we just threw into that fire? And his advisors are going, yes, oh great king. As if, oh great, he's gone a bit doolally now. He's going, no, look. I see 4 men walking around in the fire. They're all completely unbound, walking around unharmed. And the 4th looks like the sons of God. Basically, he's saying the 4th is like a supernatural figure. So then Nebuchadnezzar approached the furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of God, come out here. Did you notice he didn't call the 4th guy out? I'd be a little bit scared of calling out the guy that you had no idea who he was as well. So they came out, the satraps, we don't know who they are, the priests, the royal advisors. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was the hair on their head singed, nor were their robes scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them at all. You know when you've been to a bonfire? You stink. You absolutely stink. Even if your next door neighbours had a little burn of some garden rubbish in the back of their garden, you've left your windows open, absolutely stinks. These people had been in the fire, standing in the fire. Not even a smell of smoke was on them. That's how much God was protecting them. That's how much God's arms were wrapped around them at that time. what do we learn from this one account? This is the one thing that if you forget everything else I've said today, remember this and take this home with you. Only God can stand with you in the fire and bring you out the other side. That's what that passage teaches us. Only God. Not your parents, not your husband or your wife, your children, your family. They might want to, but they can't. Not your career. Your money won't save you in a difficult time. Ambitions, your own efforts, any little statues on your mantelpiece. No other religions or other cultural practices can do that. Only God. Even Nebuchadnezzar himself acknowledges it in verse 29. He says this, "Therefore I decree that any people or nation who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," something horrible will happen, which I won't read out because there's children in the room. But it basically says then, no other God can save in this way. He acknowledges, for no other God can save in this way. We've seen today, we've had a look at the account of Elijah. And that's shown us when you step out and put your trust in God, step out in faith for him, he's never going to let you down. Never. We looked at the Israelites and we saw actually God had a plan, a purpose, and a destiny for them. They just needed to acknowledge him, not look to themselves, but put their trust in God. And then the story in Daniel. For me, that kind of sums up the ultimate reason why I worship God. I've had it so many times in my life. I know this personally, that when you're in the fire, where you're in those hard situations, where you're in those difficult times in your life, there is no one else who can stand with you and bring you out the other side. There's nobody else who loves you enough to send their one and only son to die for you. That's what we remembered when we took communion this morning. That actually, God is so committed to you that he sent his son to die for you so that you had the freedom to worship him, so that he could spend eternity with you. Yeah, you get to spend it with him, but he did it so that he could spend eternity with you. Maybe you don't know God like I do. Maybe you don't have those experiences where everything in your life has literally fell apart and the only thing that remains and is holding you is Jesus. But you have an opportunity to get to know God. It may be that you all know Jesus. It may be that you've all committed your lives to him. But if you haven't, if you're fed up of trying to do it on your own, realizing that it's not going to work, there is a simple step you can take. You have an opportunity today to do that. You just acknowledge that he is God. That we have all done things that separated us from him. We've all done things wrong to take us away from him. And you just have to say sorry for that. You apologize to God for the things that kept you apart. You recognize that Jesus gave his life so that you could live forever with God. And then you commit to following his plan for your life. It's all those things we've talked about today. You choose to recognize how great God is. Choose to recognize what he's done for you. And you dedicate your life as a living sacrifice to worship him forevermore. If that's you today, if you've never accepted Jesus into your life, if you don't know what it is to have a purpose and a destiny that is secure, then there'll be a chance while we're worshiping in a minute. We're going to have some people at the front to be able to pray with you. And you feel free to speak to someone at the end and know what it is for Jesus to be the center of your life. But then there's something else for quite a lot of the rest of us. I think it's quite apt because we've already had a word about this morning. There are people going through some pretty tough stuff. You might be feeling a little bit abandoned by God. And you've already heard this morning that God's never left you. You're not on your own. But you're still in that situation. Just want to remind you this. Only God will stand with you in the middle of your fire, and he will bring you out the other side. It's great to hold on to that, but if you are still in that situation where you're in the fire this morning, we want to pray with you. God is standing with you and he will carry you through. But as a church, we want to help you the best we can as well. And if you're going through something in your life, a fiery situation, a darkness, an emptiness, a loneliness, whatever it is, we want to pray with you about that today. We want to support you. So in a minute, Luke's going to come and he's going to pray those two things for us. For anyone who doesn't know Jesus and wants to know him. And for people that are in situations, they need reminding that God is with you. Feel free to come out to the front where the people will be standing to pray with you. Or if you'd rather stay where you are, just stick your hand in the air. They will find you. They will come and pray with you. And then we're going to worship together. Because that's what it's all about. Why do we worship? We were made to do it, and we worship God because he's awesome. We've had a look at that this morning, and you guys have been so into worshiping the last few weeks that we're going to do it again. And that's your time. It may be actually that you just need that moment for yourself. And we sing the words of the song, "You are Waymaker. I'm in the fire, I don't know where I'm going. You make my way before me. You are miracle worker. I've been dealing with this pain, this illness for so long, but you are the miracle worker. You are with me. You are going to bring me through this. Light in the darkness. I've been alone. I've been feeling like there's no one with me. God, you are my light in that darkness." We're going to sing those words, and I need you to declare them. For you, for the people around you, we're going to worship. So Luke's going to come and pray into that now.